Citizens are advised to take the following steps. If exposed, remove clothes. Emergency broadcast system.
Podcast for the curious mind. I don't know what that means.
Broadcasting live on a Sunday night. I am Jamal with the Gingerside Chats special. Here we got Larry Jorgensen and co-host Tia. Larry, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I always look for an opportunity to talk about my most recent favorite subject.
I suppose it changes as you go along. You find new stories, huh?
New stories, new books, and new challenges.
Let me just read your bio here, Larry. You've been a journalist for many years. You're also an author of nonfiction books featuring amazing events in history. Your latest book is the one you sent me, which I appreciate. It's Shipwrecked and Rescued, Cars and Crew. What made you start researching these types of subjects, I guess? Like, what got you excited about this?
Well, this one, it happened off of the Upper Peninsula, the Keweenaw Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula, and it's an area that I have always been fascinated with. I first sort of became acquainted with it back when I was in TV news in Green Bay, and had several assignments to Upper Michigan, and really got to know the area and fell in love with it. So consequently, I go back as often as I can for vacations or just to visit. So to answer your question, about 3 summers ago, I was in Copper Harbor, which is right on the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula. And I was looking at one of these little tourist type brochures. In it, there was one picture and about a paragraph and a half that said, this little shipwreck happened right off of our coast here. And I read what was there, and I thought, this is an amazing story. And I looked on the shipwreck maps, and it wasn't on there. I looked for any additional information, couldn't find any. So I started digging and went to the Historical Society there, contacted the University Archives, and found out that it's an amazing story. It's the only time of the 6,000 shipwrecks on the history of the Great Lakes. It's the only time that a ship carrying cars, not only when wrecked, not only were the crew members saved, but so were the cars. They actually rescued the cars off of this boat after it wrecked. And the story as to how it happened, how the crew almost lost their lives out there, cold weather, snow, they were lost. That's a whole another interesting part of the book. But then to actually be able to rescue the cars off of a wrecked, abandoned, ice-covered ship that's crashed onto a reef, it's an amazing story. And because it's never been done before, and it took a lot of research, but the more I dug, the more I got into it. And one of the things that really helped, in the book, there are some fantastic photos. And the reason that those photos are there, one of the reasons, the captain of the Coast Guard rescue ship, who we talk about in the book, was an amateur photographer. So, I mean, you talk about Johnny on the spot. This guy is there with cameras, and not only was he there for what had happened, but for follow-up photos, when the cars were brought into the little town and so on and so forth. So part of the great photography in there does relate to the actual rescue, at least the first part of the rescue of the cars.
How did you find these photos?
Well, we were fortunate enough to find people that knew people, and the photos came down to the Historical Society from a daughter of the captain. And then I was given access to those photos. A lot of the other photos in the book just came from digging through archives, talking to people who had some sort of access, old magazines, newspapers, that type of thing. It was just, you kept, you get on this story and you keep digging, and pretty soon people are coming to you with things. Have you looked here? Have you looked, it's interesting because the story had never really been revealed in total like we did in the book. In fact, up there in the Upper Peninsula, there were actually people that had never heard of it, never heard of the shipwreck. One of the first places I went to get information in Houghton, Michigan, there's Michigan Tech, pretty good sized university, and they have archives of the area and beyond. So one of the first places I went was to the archives, and this is to show you how it wasn't a secret, but there wasn't, a lot of people didn't know about it. The first lady I talked to at the archives had never heard of the shipwreck. Wow. Bangor, never heard of it. And the university is 40 miles away from the site where it happened. She said, I never heard of that. Well, I'm going to have to look into that. Well, fortunately, there was someone else in the archives that had heard about it, and they were able to dig out some old newspaper articles and point me in a direction that took me to further information. But that's how it was. No one had ever really took all the pieces and put them together, and they made a fantastic story. Not just the fact there was a ship and it was carrying boats, but carrying cars, but the history of that boat, and then the rescue of the crew, and then the fact that, one of the cars is still up there on the peninsula, and you can go see it. So the whole thing just ties into this fantastic story when it's all put together. And that was the fun part of being able to bring all these pieces together into a book so people could get the full story of that wreck.
What time frame are we talking about here?
Yeah, for the viewers.
The ship left Detroit, headed for Duluth with 240 Chryslers, and by the way, 6 Whippets. If for those who don't know what a Whippet is, it was made by the Willis Company in Toledo, and they only made them for about 2-3 years, and then I think they found out they could make probably more money making Jeeps for the Army or whatever. So anyhow, there's 240 cars. There's 6 Whippets. They leave Detroit in the early part of November. Head off towards Duluth is where they were supposed to go with the cars. Well, they get into Lake Superior, and Lake Superior is known as the nastiest, worst lake to be on. It's big, it's deep, it gets really vicious in a storm because of the depth and the size of the lake. But the captain who was taking charge of the ship said, he had no fear. He's been through storms before. Well, let's talk a little bit about the ship. The ship was originally intended to be a general cargo carrier, meaning it would carry things like iron ore. So it rode lower in the water at that time than once they loaded it with cars. And to get it to handle cars, there was a lot of modifications that were done. There was a deck created in the lower level. The upper level deck had to be leveled, so to speak. The holds where cargo would be dumped in were taken out, and the deck was basically flattened. But also, even when it was loaded with cars, it rode higher in the water. And consequently, when it got into this fierce storm and the storm started tossing it around, the captain lost control of it. It lost the rudder, lost complete control, and ultimately it got tossed onto this reef high onto a reef. It got gashed, badly gashed in the process. So it's basically, it becomes trashed. It becomes um, a ship of no further use. So here they are. This is 1926, November. Bad end of November. Very bad time to be on the lake and to be on the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula. So they crash on the reef. The crew finally is able to get to shore by taking a lifeboat, and they had to chop the lifeboat free of ice. They take the lifeboat. A few of the guys get to shore. They have a rope. They get it back to the boat. Eventually, they get everybody to shore. Now the cars and the boat are still sitting out on the reef.
Well,
The crew. Go ahead.
sorry, these lifeboats, they're not like the Titanic lifeboats, right? I mean, they're a completely different style. The ones I saw, they almost sort of look like pontoons with a flat top on it.
Yeah, they're actually in those days. It was almost more like an overgrown rowboat. Really, I mean, there was very little protection. They were a lot more seaworthy. You know, they were made for that. But nevertheless, they were not like the modern day lifeboats that you see. You know, tending to the oil rigs and that kind of thing. Um, but they finally all got to shore. But their problems were magnified because the captain had thought, and it was snowing, he couldn't really tell it was snowing, it was a bad blizzard, but he thought that they had sailed west of the little community of Copper Harbor. There's a mountain there called Brockway Mountain. And through the snow and blizzard, he thought he saw Brockway Mountain, which was west of Copper Harbor. Well, they weren't west. As it turned out, the reef was east of Copper Harbor and Lake Superior. So when the guys finally get to shore, they think, boy, you know, if we can get to Copper Harbor, maybe we can find shelter, food, something to be saved. So thinking that they are west of Copper Harbor, that's what the captain thought, they start walking east. Well, they're already east of Copper Harbor, right? So now we have a crew that's lost. There's no communications in those days. No one knows the ship has even crashed. So they walk for quite a while until they realize they're headed in the wrong direction. They get turned around. Now, some of these guys on the crew had not anticipated this type of weather, this type of a challenge. And there were some of them that were poorly dressed. I mean, some of them even had like loafers on for protection on their feet. You know, they get off the ship and they're lost. The snow is 4 feet deep and it's drifting higher. Temperatures are around zero. You know, they finally get turned around and headed towards the little town of Copper Harbor. But they still don't really know where they're going, how to get there. And little by little, they're really getting frostbite, cold, tired. They're beginning to think they're not going to make it. So, fortunately for them, another boat crashes that same night, but it doesn't really crash. It's just kind of goes. It goes ashore. And later, in fact, the ship is put back into use. But it does get stranded on shore, and a couple crew members from that ship take off walking. They walked about 6 miles until they could find a very crude telephone, and they could call the Coast Guard rescue station, which was on Lake Superior, west, about 30 miles west of Copper Harbor. So they told the Coast Guard rescue chief their problems. He set off. He knew where they were. He set off to find them in this storm to rescue them. So he goes right by the abandoned shipwreck, the abandoned Bangor, not even able to see it. and he goes down to the sort of the southeast side of the peninsula and rescues the 21 guys from this other crew, other ship, and headed back to Copper Harbor, which is where he wanted to take them. The storm clears a little bit, and he sees the boat. He sees the Bangor up there on the reef. So he pulls in and realizes there's nobody there. It's abandoned.
Right.
He proceeds to head towards Copper Harbor. Well, a few hours later, they come across this little bay, and this is where the crew is. They have built themselves a little place to rest for a while in this bay, and the captain sees them in there. He pulls in the bay and he hails to them, "Build a fire so I know where you're at. I'll take this crew to Copper Harbor. I will come back and rescue you." And he did. He was able, after these guys are wandering around for 2 days out there, he finally comes back and gets them and takes them to the little community of Copper Harbor. Now, this is 1926. Copper Harbor is snowed in. I mean, it's an isolated little community. Population probably 2 to 3 dozen at that time. And there were a couple buildings there that one would have a little boarding house, and not big, just a small place. And another one, there was a restaurant and a bar and so forth, and a blacksmith shop. So they determined that that place could handle some of these crew. But we've got now a population of 50-some crewmen, rescued crewmen in this town. What are they going to do with them? Well, it so happens that a family that lives there, the Berg family, and we talk about them in the book, they say, we'll take them in. Well, Mr. Berg had fortunately slaughtered 2 hogs before the snow set in. So they had pork. They also had, as I was told, the best producing cow in town, and they had some chicken. So they figured, well, we can feed these guys. The problem, the crew members were so badly frostbitten, so in such bad condition, that it was difficult even to get them the short distance from the dock to the house. They were falling down in the snow. Some of them had taken blankets and had ripped the blankets into strips to wrap around their legs for warmth. But the fallacy of that was the ice got built up underneath the blankets and just made things worse. They finally got him, actually the son of the Bergs, 2 of the sons, guided them to the house, got them in the house, and they literally collapsed around this big wood burning stove, old time stove, and just collapsed there, fell asleep. The one son, his duty was to mop up the water as the ice began to melt, So they are there, and they are being fed. Some of them are really in bad condition. So they figure out what they better do is they better get some medical help. The Coast Guard captain, when he got back to his location, he was able to call the little town of Calumet. It's about 40 miles away. And that town plays a big part in the whole rescue situation. He was able to get a hold of a doctor there, and he said, we need help. Well, there was a Dodge Chrysler dealer in that little town, and he had been experimenting with this. And you've probably seen them before, where they take a vehicle like an old Model T and they'll put tracks on the back wheels and they'll replace the front wheels with skis. He'd been experimenting with one of those, and he actually was the one, his first job, he took the insurance man, the claims adjuster, out to the ship shortly after the wreck, because the insurance company, first on the spot, took him out there and declared, yeah, the ship is a loss. It's a total loss. So the Coast Guard captain was able to get a hold of the doctor at the hospital who knew that they had this little snow vehicle. And the man with the snow vehicle took the doctor out to the house where the crew was hunkered in and took the most seriously injured ones back to town on his snow vehicle, 40 miles. You can imagine that must have been a real trip to the hospital. Eventually, all of the crew got to the hospital primarily by sleigh. They were able to get them all in there. Some of them were so badly hurt that they were there for months. As they recovered, each crew member recovered. He was able to get back to his hometown. I was told, don't know if it's true, but some of them sort of took a fancy to their nurses and decided that they would become permanent residents of Calumet, Michigan. We don't know how many, and we haven't been able to track down descendants of those nurses or lucky sailors. But
if I was them, I would move.
I don't blame them.
When you're talking about this shipwreck, you said it crashed on a reef, and then they had to get in these lifeboats to get to shore. Like how far of a distance are we talking about in this storm?
It wasn't far. It was less than 2 miles, a little over a mile from the shore to the reef.
Okay.
That's one of the things that ultimately led to the rescue of the cars, because we're not talking a reef out in the middle of Lake Superior, you know. But nevertheless, it was a bad enough reef that when the ship was tossed onto it, it gashed the ship, it totaled the ship. And we could talk later in the story, but why the ship stayed there for a long time. Before we get totally off of the crew, I want to give credit to the granddaughter of the Berg family, because although she lives in Indiana, they have a summer home up there not far from Copper Harbor. And she came up twice. I was able to interview her. A lot of the information, a lot of the photos about the home and so forth came from her. Again, talking about how do you find this information. The second time she came up, she brought some material. She said, had been going through my grandmother's box of memorabilia after we had talked, and I found this card, and I've been able to reproduce it in the book. The card was a Christmas card from the first mate of the ship, who had gone back to Ohio. He lived in Ohio. And the card thanked the family for saving the crew members. And it's a very touching personal card to the Bergs. And she had found this, allowed me to take it, copy it, and put it into the book. So, I mean, that was the kind of help we got. You talk about the research, that was the kind of help we got.
Yeah, what a treasure. And you're talking, we did a show on the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is probably, I would say, the most famous shipwreck in the Great Lakes, because I would say that again.
We need a song.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Gordon Lightfoot. But when I was doing research on that shipwreck, it blew my mind just how violent the storms up there get, especially in November. They said waves close to 50 foot tall. These ships are loaded down. They already don't have a lot of clearance, and the type of things that happened to Edmund Fitzgerald, and then the debate on how it sunk. But I would assume the weather conditions were probably similar for this shipwreck as well.
Well, and you talk about the Fitz. I was fortunate enough in my research to make a pretty good acquaintance with a diver who had gone down to the Fitz and described to me what he saw, including bodies of crewmen. But he, through his dive, substantiates pretty much the conclusion that most people have as to how the Fitz sunk. You talk about those 50-foot waves. Well, the storm was so bad that the front portion of the ship and the rear each got suspended on a separate wave. Consequently,
Oh, wow.
the center of the ship, which was loaded with taconite iron ore and very heavy, had nothing to support it, and the ship broke in half. And divers go down there, they can see it. It's very obvious what happened. The ship broke in half under its own weight because there was nothing there to support the middle of the ship.
A lot of that had to do with the insurance company, didn't it? And placing blame by saying it was improperly secured hatches. That way they could call man air.
Yeah, they said that, but there was not enough water taken in through the unsecured hatches to cause a ship to split like that.
Yeah.
It was pretty obvious to this diver what had happened. I mean, you got a ship broken in half, and if it would have been too much water, now I'm just using my non-educated guess at it, but it seems to me if there would have been water coming in through the hatches, the water would have been spread out throughout the cargo area of the boat, and you wouldn't have had this dynamic split down the center. It probably would have ultimately sank, but the wreckage would not have looked the same, I believe. And this is just my uneducated observation.
Well, I'm more uneducated than you are on this, so I appreciate your viewpoint on it.
Yeah, you're boots on the ground.
Yeah. When it comes to this wreck with the city of Bangor, like the weather conditions were similar to that, though, weren't they? It was late November.
Right.
Do we know what the temperature was when these guys were hiking around for 2 days?
Well, I was told by, again, the granddaughter who talked to the family, who obviously had communications with the crew, and there was a couple old interviews that I was able to find that a reporter had done with the crew, and by that some of the crew, and it was done years after, and there was just a couple of the guys that were still alive that he interviewed, but they all pretty much agree that they were dealing with temperatures when they were on shore that were near zero, well below freezing, and of course you're out there in the midst of a storm. You've got this wind coming across the peninsula that's taking 4-foot snow and making 10-foot drifts out of it. So it was pretty treacherous, and that those November storms. That's what they say. Well, the song says, you know, it's November on Lake Superior, so that pretty much is a similar situation.
So they were having to hike through these snow drifts and loafers, and they're not dressed whatsoever. Some of them aren't dressed whatsoever. Well, I suppose very few.
Not that, some of them have wrapped blankets around their legs, and I mean, the only thing they had for nutrition, the cook on the ship had a case of oranges, and when they realized what had happened, he brought the oranges up and he said, "Help yourself, guys." So some of them had oranges. That's all they had
for 2 days.
For 2 days till they got to the Berg home, and
surprised they didn't freeze.
The one crewman that was interviewed for this old interview that I found said that breakfast that next morning, the pork and the eggs and the so forth. He said that was the best breakfast I ever had.
What a better way to survive a shipwreck than you get bacon at the end of it.
But
America.
The story then of the cars becomes even more amazing, because Walter Chrysler, by the way, went out there after he was told the ship was a total loss. They took him out there to see it for himself. From the shore, he looked out there. Yeah, you're right. It's a total loss. But it dawns on him that he's got 200 and some cars on there. Now, there were 13, go back a little bit, there were 13 cars that are on the bottom of Lake Superior. What happened, the cars on deck were chained individually to one long chain. There were rows of cars. Well, when it got into the bad storm, the row of cars that was closest to the outside, to the deck of the boat, the one chain broke. And when it broke, those 13 cars all together, off the ship they went. And they're still at the bottom of Lake Superior. But anyhow, Walter decides he wants his cars back. So he hires a salvage company from Duluth. And they come up with a plan. First thing they do is they post a guardhouse on land to watch the ship. Then they wait until the ice freezes completely around the reef. So they've got a little platform to work from. And they go out and they build a ramp. There's a picture in the book of the ramp from the ice and the reef to the boat. And they begin to get the cars off of the boat, onto the reef, onto the ice. And it was not an easy task. The ones that were on the top deck, and there are pictures that the captain took of this, some of them, you wouldn't even know there was cars underneath the snow or ice because it had accumulated in those 2 months. So there was a tremendous effort to just get the cars free. The cars on the lower deck had water damage, but the water didn't get in there that much because the boat was so high on the reef. So the project was get the cars on the upper deck shoveled out, get the ice chopped off them, get them off of the boat. Then when the boat was remodeled to be a car carrier, there was an elevator put in and the lower deck was made solid. So you could bring the cars up on the elevator. I presume it was hand operated. So little by little, they get the cars off. Now, another problem, the batteries in the cars. Some of them had batteries that were dead. Some of them didn't have batteries. So you had the first batch that had batteries, they would go to town. And they, by the way, at first they were going to build a road through the woods to Copper Harbor. They got about a mile with that project, and they said, "This is not work." Can you imagine trying to build a road in that kind of
money?
So somebody said, "Wait a minute, guys. The ice is strong enough along the shore of Lake Superior. We can drive along the shore." So they started to drive the cars along the shore. We've got a picture in the book of a line of cars and the famous Copper Harbor Lighthouse in the background. And they're driving them to Copper Harbor. They'd get the cars to Copper Harbor. They'd take the good batteries out, take them out to the boat, get some more cars, bring them to town. Finally, we've got 200 and some brand new Chryslers lined up in this field at the little town of Copper Harbor. 200 and some new Chryslers. Population probably 30 people. You're not going to.
Everyone thought they were getting a free car, huh?
Right.
Now we have to remember that Copper Harbor is isolated in the winter. There's one road that goes from Copper Harbor down to Calumet Lorium. That's where the hospital was. And there's also a railroad depot there. So the plan is get the road opened up, drive the cars, easily said than done, to Calumet, get them on a train, ship them back to Detroit. Well, the snow is so deep and the road is never plowed in the wintertime. There's 2 counties on that peninsula. They took the road crews from both counties 2 weeks to get that road plowed open, and they actually had to bring in a new experimental plow from Minnesota that was one of these kind of turbine jet blowing types of a snowplow, and they were able to finally get the road completely open. Okay, so in the meantime, they have sleighs with tanks hauling fuel out to Copper Harbor to put in the cars, right? You're going to drive them down there, you got to have fuel. So they get the road open. Now, the salvage company is in charge of all of this. And either Mr. Chrysler or his insurance company had agreed to pay like $140 some per car returned to Detroit. So the salvage company says, okay, we've got these 200 and some Chryslers in Copper Harbor. We got to get them to Calumet. We'll pay $5 a head for someone to drive a car down this newly plowed snow road. Well, you've only got about 30 people in Copper Harbor, So all of a sudden, school kids down in Calumet and elsewhere, and the few high school kids that were up in this little school in Copper Harbor, decided it was a good day to take a day off. And for $5, you had a lot of kids and a lot of guys that they didn't have anything to do in the wintertime were driving cars down the road from Copper Harbor to Calumet. Now, here's where the story gets even more interesting. And there's all kinds of urban hit stories that go with this as to how many cars actually made it to Calumet. But you think about it, okay? You have the opportunity to make $5, and you're driving down the road in a brand new Chrysler. Okay, so as you get closer to Calumet, there are some side roads, and I had people tell me when I was doing the research, oh, my grandfather drove one of those cars, and he knows that not all of them made it to Calumet. Now, was it one or was it six? We pretty much know that the Whippets never made it. And we were able to track down one Chrysler that stayed on the peninsula. The same family had it for 69 years. The way they got it, when the ship hit the reef, one car was tossed off the ship towards the shore, and it kind of crashed in a ball on the shore. So that car was taken out by sleigh, and ultimately, when it got to Calumet, Chrysler sold it to the local dealer for $25 for parts. Well, the dealer also was able to purchase a car, and he later sold it to the Slezarczyk family, to the one Andrew Slezarczyk, and Andrew had it. He was told it was a car from the Bangor, and he had it for a couple of years and he died. So his brother bought it from the widow, and he just loved the car. He drove it he drove it in parades. Any chance he had, he drove it. That car got 200,000 miles on it. And we have a picture in the book where it's going through the state vehicle inspection program. The inspector is there, and the inspector is saying, he's congratulating the brother, and he's saying, I've never had a car that old with that many miles come through the inspection. Well, finally, it goes down to others in the family, and it got to the point where no one was able to really take care of it, cared about it, and it was sold to a person in town. He was an insurance salesman, ironically, who was into restoring tractors and things, and he thought he could restore the car to its original appearance and get it running real good and make some money with it. Well, he realized after 5 years that was a dream, and he decided he would sell it. The people at the Historical Society, which have several properties on the peninsula, including the lighthouse in Eagle Harbor, wanted to buy it. And they did a little fundraising, got enough money together, and they bought the car. And it was taken to the lighthouse where they have a small museum at Eagle Harbor. And it sits there today. There's a picture in the book of the car there and of the maritime historian at the museum pointing to an axe mark on that car where they chopped the ice off of it to get it off the ship. So there is one, we know for sure, one Chrysler that we were able to track down. Now, what about the Whippets? Okay, well, in the book, we've got a picture of a Whippet that is in a falling down shed. And that, what we're able to find out is that Whippet was originally claimed, given whatever, to the two guys in town that had this little boarding house saloon type thing. Well, they then must have passed it on to another owner who had it under the shed. Well, all of a sudden the shed is starting to fall apart. The car is visible. The owner doesn't really want it. He sells it to somebody for $500. And at that point, we lost track of it. But we do have the picture of it under that shed, and it's in the book. So there's Whippet number one. We also talked to a lady who's with the Historical Society, who said in her early years, she went to an estate sale in Laurium, Calumet, or Twin Cities, and was able to purchase a vehicle that had been stored in a garage that was a Whippet. So there's Whippet number two. In the museum, in the hotel, the old hotel that's still in operation in Calumet, there's a display, and it talks about the Bangor, and it's got two wooden Whippet wheels in that display. So there's Whippet number three, at least a part of it. Now, where did the other three go? Probably someone who was driving them when they got beyond the stage of use sent them to the local junkyard, and that's where they ended up. But we're convinced that all six Whippets stayed on the peninsula, because why would Walter want them back, and why would his insurance company pay to have them back? Competition.
Yes.
So that's an interesting story too, is the story of the car. So you've got this all in one book. You've got the story of the shipwreck. You've got the story of the crew, the story of the cars, and then what about the abandoned, trashed ship? It sits on the reef for 18 years. Okay? And people would go out when they could walk out in the summer to that spot through the woods and look out at it, and it was kind of a tourist attraction. I've even got a picture where Mr. Berg went out one winter, went across the ice, and he's sitting next to the ship, next to the gash in the ship. So it sits there for 18 years. There was one salvage company that said, "Oh, we'll get it." And that was shortly after, like a year or two after the accident. And they were going to get it, refloat it, use it as kind of a barge for hauling stuff on the Great Lakes. And they actually had temporarily patched the gash in the ship enough that they were starting to pump some of the water out. Problem was, the ship was so high on the reef that their tugboat couldn't get to it, and they had no way to horse it off of the reef. So they gave up after a year of planning and great dreams and so forth. They gave up. Again, how do you find this information? There was a story in the local paper about it, the paper which no longer exists, by the way. So we do know that really happened, and they gave up and went back to wherever they were from lower Michigan. So anyhow, it sits there for 18 years. What happens? World War II. And what do we need? Steel. So another salvage company enters the picture. They say, we can do it. They go out, and their goal is to, with torches and a limited amount of explosives, they get the ship cut down to the water line and a little bit below and salvage the pieces of steel, bring them in. And I've got one really good picture in there of a bulldozer dragging the bow of the pieces of the bow of the ship. And ultimately, they got them all into Copper Harbor and they got them shipped off for the war effort. However, there was still some remains out there. So along comes the midnight salvage crew. Two guys that are cutting trees. They're all, lumberjacks in the woods out there, hear about this, and they say, we can make more money salvaging steel than we can cutting down trees. So they concoct this vehicle. It's an old truck, and they have a big high grain cane. What am I saying? Like a winch type unit on the back of it. Okay, a crane type winch. Okay, and they go out to the spot when you can get out there in the warm weather, and they begin to go out to what's left of the ship that's under the water and get pieces and drag them ashore with this crazy vehicle they've got. And they get enough pieces of it that they make a pretty good cash haul out of the deal. So rescue number 2, what happens to the ship? We have a professional salvage company and a pirate group that benefit by the ship 18 years later. To this day, there are still occasionally small pieces that become uncovered because of wave action or whatever. And a few of those small pieces, very small, are in the museum along with the car, as is in the museum the captain's desk. The captain was able to get his desk somehow off of the ship, and he gave it to the Berg family as appreciation for saving the crew. They, in turn, have put it on permanent loan at the museum. The ship's log is also at the museum. So it's and a lot of pictures. A lot of the pictures that are in my book have been blown up to larger size and are on the wall at the museum. So if you're planning a trip to Upper Michigan, make sure you get out to the Keweenaw Peninsula and out to Eagle Harbor to the lighthouse, and you'll see the actual car from Shipwrecked and Rescued.
Not in November, though.
No, don't go in November. They have become a very popular. That area in the summer is extremely popular for lower Michigan people to come visit, and people from all over, because it is loaded with history. You got the history of the mining that took place out there. You also, Copper Harbor is the jumping off point, so to speak, for people who want to go out to Isle Royale, which one time was owned by the Canadians, and then we got it, and it's a fantastic island, huge island, and it's now run by the Forest Service as a park, and you could take a ship. They have it's about a 4-hour cruise to the island, and you can get it on the cruise, and people do that cruise during good weather is busy every day. You'll see cars lined up, people parking and getting ready to get on the ship and go out to the island. So there's a lot of visitors to Upper Michigan, especially in the summer, although they now also have a pretty good winter clientele of people that like to snowmobile. I used to be one of those.
We just got done with the Winter Games here in Northwest Iowa. and it's where I grew up, was Northwest Iowa, and when the lakes freeze over, there's a lot of winter activities they do and stuff like that. It's pretty
I would
fun.
imagine a little hockey going on.
Yeah. Broom ball is what they call it. They do. They have a game called broom ball where you have brooms and then a little rubber ball, and you're not allowed to wear any skates. You have to do it in tennis shoes.
Sounds like a better version of curling,
Yeah.
which I've never understood that sport.
I love curling, man. I don't know
You
why I
do?
like it. I don't know why I like it either. It just looks fascinating.
Uh-oh. I have insulted our leader here. I mean, you get up into Canada, and there's as many curling arenas as there are hockey arenas.
You got to embrace the cold if you're going to live in it.
I think if I was up there, I'd go into the business of making modified curling brooms that were guaranteed to create a winner. Okay,
The Jorgensens.
right.
Yeah, broom. So, if anyone's interested in getting the book Shipwrecked and Rescued by Larry Jorgensen, where can they purchase that at?
Well, I love it when they go to my website, which is easy. It's simply shipwreckedandrescued.com, because then I can even write something in the book when I send it to them if they want.
Nice.
But it is available on, the big one on Amazon. And if you get into Michigan, and I'll tell you, you talk about Iowa, there is, maybe I can find the name of it. There is a vintage auto museum in Iowa. Let me see if I can find the name of it here. The Antique Car Museum of Iowa in Coralville.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, in their gift shop, you can purchase a copy of my book. And this is the other thing that has amazed me about the book as compared to the Edmund Fitz. Not only do we have a happy ending, I wrote a book about a shipwreck, I thought. What I found out is I've got as many people who love vintage automobiles that are interested in it. And there are car museums that are putting it in their gift shop. I did an interview, what was it, day before yesterday, with a group that is a vintage car group. But you can also find it in museums in Michigan, lots of museums, lighthouse museums. The lighthouses that are open in the summer, they have gift stores, and they've got my book. There's 2 bookstores out on Mackinac Island. They've got the book. There's stores up along Sault Ste. Marie that have got it. There's a couple bookstores, Holland and Traverse City. I'm trying to think of some, but they've got the book. And what makes it nice is I'm getting reorders. They're selling the book.
Nice.
The book. Now I got to boast a little bit. The book was just recently named one of 10. They call them notable books of 2022 by the Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association, and you get this little gold sticker you can put on your book.
Congratulations! That's a huge deal.
For sure. No, for sure, absolutely.
So,
And you said
it's fun. It's been a fun experience. It really has.
Well, and how long did it take you to get this book from the start of the idea when you found out about it to actually getting it printed out?
I got addicted to it, and I was full speed. I found out about it in the summer, and by the following summer, we had the book release at the Eagle Harbor Museum. I did it in a year.
Wow.
But my wife says she lost me for a year, because I got so addicted to the story. And one thing, as you can tell in the book, one thing leads to another, leads to another. So it wasn't simply, here's a shipwreck, and it wrecked, and so what, And that's one of the things that one of the judges in that award told me. He said, not only did you have the shipwreck, but it was a complete story. The detailed things that really put it all together. Talk about shipwrecks. in the book, at the end of the book, I talk about another shipwreck. And it was owned by the same company that owned the Bangor, the Nicholson Transportation Company out of Detroit. They had, I think they had as many as 12 ships that hauled cars. This particular ship, the Sentinel, 2 years after the Bangor, was in Lake Michigan, and it was loaded with Nashes from the Nash factory in Kenosha. It was headed up Lake Michigan, headed down Lake Michigan from the Taconite mines in Upper Michigan. Was an ore carrier loaded with taconite, iron ore. And it was a stormy night, as they always say when they start a book. It was a stormy night off of Port Washington. They, too late, became aware of each other, and to make matters worse, they each turned into each other instead of away. So that the heavily loaded iron ore ship put a major hit on the car carrier, and within 6 minutes, the carrier with the Nashes went to the bottom. Unfortunately, it took 6 crew members, including the crew with it. But to this day, there is a saying that on the bottom of Lake Michigan, there is the largest Nash museum in the world. They're all down there, and divers have gone down and seen them and have seen the boat, you know. So it kind of verifies what I had said about they don't usually save autos when a ship gets into a wreck on the Great Lakes, and that's a good example.
What would you say is your biggest takeaway from that, from the beginning to the end? I mean, I feel like the Bergs got screwed over. They deserved a car. You know, they didn't get a car out of the
Right.
deal.
Hey, no,
Yeah, yeah.
Well, but Mr. Berg went on to a few years later to get elected sheriff.
Oh, okay. Hey,
And
okay.
it's another part of the story. He gets elected sheriff, so they move from Copper Harbor to Eagle River, Michigan, in Lake Superior, because that's where the county seat is. Okay, so he becomes a sheriff. Well, Aya, his wife, has to assume the role of under sheriff or something. One of her main functions is to take care of the jail. As I was told again by the granddaughter, when someone would be brought up before the judge for some sort of a violation, and he was given his choice of pay the fine or go to jail, he would usually take jail because Ida was a heck of a cook. And but Ida became a well-known person in Michigan history. Her husband, William, was elected. He ran for a second term, was reelected. He was to take office in January, start of the term. In December of that year, he was out helping a person who had his vehicle stuck in the snow. He caught pneumonia. He died like less than 2 weeks into his term.
Oh,
Ida became sheriff. Not only did she serve his term, she ran for and was elected to 2 more terms. And she, in the Michigan book of famous women, she's listed.
okay.
She served 3 terms as a sheriff up there in the Keweenaw Peninsula. Amazing lady.
It would have been
There's
cool.
a trope.
Yeah, it would have been cool to have just, I mean, you got a chance to really just dive into some of these people's lives from the shipwreck point onwards and see how it affected them going on.
Well, and that was, you said, what was my takeaway? That was my takeaway, is to be able to meet people who knew something or were related to or had something they wanted to tell you about this story. And, you know, I love that area anyhow. I'll be back up there this summer. I like the people, and it really gave me a chance to get closer to some of the people that I hadn't met before in going up into the Keweenaw Peninsula. On the very last page of my book, I kind of write a little tribute to the people, and I don't have the exact wording, but it's basically it's along the, they have this saying, it takes a village, to whatever. Well, I'll tell you what, it took a peninsula to create the saving of the boat, the people, the crew. It took a peninsula of people in various ways to make that happen, and consequently to make my book possible.
My boy is big into shipwrecks. It started last, I guess it started at last fall, and I showed him your book, and he was just enthralled with all the pictures you had on it, and it's amazing how many photos you got from this account, and it really brings it to life, I feel. So if you get a chance to go to shipwreckedandrescued.com, correct?
That's it.
Yep. Go get yourself this book. It's a great book. So, well, thank you, Larry, so much. Anything else? Anything else you need to plug? Next story you have, you should come on the show. Give us a little.
Well, I'm working on one right now.
Whoa!
All right.
And again, I write nonfiction because that's all I know. I'm an old news dog. If someone you got to write a novel, I would be a lost puppy. Okay, I have to go out and find the facts and put them on paper. I like to write. I like the research. I had done a book, actually 2 books before that, called The Coca-Cola Trail, which is about people and places in the history of Coca-Cola. And one of the people who I got to know and supported my effort, he told me, he said, "You're having too much fun doing research. When you can write the book?"
Hey, it's important. That's important.
So anyway, there's another one coming, and it's going to involve snow and all kinds of stuff, and we'll get back to you with it. Okay?
Yeah, we'll keep our eyes open for it. It was a pleasure meeting you, Larry. Thanks
Nice
so much.
meeting you, Larry.
Pleasure meeting both of you, and wish you well out there in South Dakota. I could tell you some South Dakota stories, but that's another time. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds
Well,
good. Have a good one
on your
Larry.
notable book. Hopefully we get another one.
That was Larry Jorgensen. If you get a chance to go to that website, shipwreckedandrescued.com, Cars and Crew by Larry Jorgensen. What a cool story, huh?
I mean, to independently, obviously, do your research just because you were curious with it and heard about it. Yeah, that's a lot. So big ups to him.
I think that's the coolest thing about like our show is because we're I feel like sort of the same boat as Larry. Obviously, we're not as polished as him, but like just all these different little stories that come along.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple that definitely stick with me that I enjoyed. So
yeah. So anyway, well, thanks for coming on, Tia.
Appreciate it.
I want everyone to understand the playoffs were going on during this interview, and Tia turned off the TV and decided to come do the interview. So kudos to you.
I thought it was going to be later, so that's my defense.
That's all right. I did use guilt, but it still counts because you showed up. So
well, I can't wait for the next one.
I made sure the Super Bowl wasn't booked with an interview, so we should be good.
Yeah, won't be there. Sorry.
All right. Well, until next week, everyone. We've got I guess should we do a little teaser of what we got going on next week?
I mean, I'm excited for it, so sure.
We've got someone. God dang it! See, I'm gonna have to edit all this out. We've got a meditation expert from India coming on next week. So
nice.
Be interesting to hear her perspective.
Love meditation.
Yeah. Well, I think that'd be exciting to. I love all these different types of cultures and stuff that.
I got Sanskrit and Hindi on me, so yeah. Definitely.
Oh, okay, all right. I think she's single, bud. So we can.
So am I.
You hear that, ladies? All right.
You heard it here.
Have a good week, everybody.
Take it easy.